Aloha and mahalo to everyone who is attending live and who will watch later. This is the HK West Maui Community Fund's Scholar Series. Today, Kanani Kuo will introduce our speaker. Please remember to enjoy the Mele of West Maui by listening to Na Hoku Hano Hano, nominated and winning musical albums, Le Na Honoa Pi'ilani, Songs of West Maui, and Le Na Hoa Pi'ilani Na Mele Ho, available on all digital platforms. The accompanying songbook is available from Kamehameha Publishing, and the project is a benefit for West Maui's Kaiapuni Auxiliary Organization, Na Leo Kalale. Thank you and enjoy the talk for this evening.
Vilina mai kako, a mahalo ia o ko I ke ako ana mai. Happy New Year, everybody. The series is co-sponsored by HK West Maui Community Fund, the University of Hawaii Maui College Hawaiian Studies Department, and the Kuei Petition Hui. The lectures occur monthly, and the series features a host of new and established scholars, also innovators, and their research and work on Hawaii and the Hawaiian communities. We proudly present this to you via Zoom and live through HK West Maui's Facebook page. Live tonight. Tonight's presentation, Reclaiming Hawaiian Traditional Clothing, discussion on understanding the methods of making wearable kapa today. Lisa Schattenburg-Raymond is an ethnobotanist with a passion for working in Hawaiian fiber arts. She is a lecturer in Hawaiian ethnobotany and Maʻawe, Hawaiian fiber arts at the University of Hawaii Maui College. Lisa has a bachelor's of science in horticulture with a minor in ethnobotany from the University of Hawaii. Prior to teaching, she was an executive director for Maui Nui Botanical Gardens right here in Kahului for 10 years. Continues to work closely with them, giving annual workshops in kapa making and Hawaiian dyes. She is most fascinated with the kapa making process and the dyes, and her research focuses on traditionally available Hawaiian materials and methods of the 18th and the 19th century. Give your virtual round of applause for tonight's guest speaker. Aloha nui, mai kumu, Lisa Schattenburg-Raymond. Aloha kumu.
Aloha, it's so nice to see you. Kanani was my student last semester, and I miss you, miss our great conversations. So it's nice to be back here. I was hoping we were going to be able to do it in person, but things are what they are. So, so awesome. You know, I have some material links that, and I wasn't sure exactly how to post them. But maybe we can do that after the class.
Yeah, if you post them in the chat, I'll put them on as a link on as a comment on the Facebook live stream.
Maybe I'll do that while one of our videos is going. So awesome. Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge all the pumu and practitioners that have started this for us. Their Iki has set the foundation for myself and everybody else. A number of them have passed, but their legacies still live on. We look back to the beginning to like Malia Solomon and Pua Van Dorp, who are some of the early pioneers. Also my kumu, Moana Isley, and my mentor, Kupuna Marie McDonald, very influential. And today we still have, a number of leaders such as Master Toolmaker, Kanae Keawe, and other kumu such as Rowan McDonald, Delani Tanahi, brother and sister duo Saul Apio and Verna Takashima, Ka'iolani De Silva, Aia'i Bello, and Maile Andrade, all wonderful teachers who continue to teach and share their Ike with their students, and many others. But what I find really exciting now is that we have practitioners that are passing knowledge generationally, like my friend Lei Ishikawa, who's teaching her daughters and her grandchildren kapa making. And there are many others that are now, we've been doing this a while now, so we're starting to share it down generationally. And I'd also like to acknowledge my haumana, who teach me new things all the time, and they make me a better kumu. So, and I hope some of them are joining us today. So before we begin, I was, if you're out there watching, and I'm not sure how this all works, but maybe if you can respond. I'm just curious about how many people who are watching who are actually kapa makers. that would be an interesting thing to learn. And also, how many of the viewers are also Mallow wearers or want to be Mallow wearers, are interested in actually wearing Kappa Mallow. So that would be something interesting to get some feedback on. So, okay, so I'm going to do a little PowerPoint here, and let me share my PowerPoint. Okay. So can I get a nod from Kanani or Bianca that my PowerPoint is up on the screen?
Yep, it looks good to us.
Okay, awesome. So here we go. So I'm just kind of a little timeline. Back in in 2011 is kind of when this whole thing started with, and some of you, if you're fans of Kappa and things, you might have remembered seeing the Ho'ike at Mary Monarch in 2011, where Kupuna Marie McDonald got a couple of dozen of us together, that pretty much most of the Kappa makers at the time, to outfit Kekuhi halau with Kappa. So this was kind of the first time we really got together and made wearable Kappa. So this was really kind of a big deal for us. And but one of the things that came out of this event was that we had a lot of costume failures. There was tearing and things, didn't really hold together. And so when we had a follow-up meeting, Kupuna Marie and joined us to, let's try and figure out how to make really good wearable Kappa. So that's kind of, one of the things that I've been, when she asked me to do something, that's what I do. So that's kind of where I started with this process and trying to understand how to make better and more wearable Kappa. So my methods are probably different from other Kappa makers. We all have our own ways of doing things, but mine are based on a lot of years of research, a lot of trial and error, mostly error. And what I'm going to show you today is we're going to talk about some of the different kinds of Wauke and how they're used, and methods of making Kappa and the construction of Mallow, Pa'u, and Kihei. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Okay, so Wauke varieties. You may not know, but we have 3 Hawaiian Wauke varieties. We have the one I'm going to be talking most about today is the Wauke Nui, which is this one here with the really big leaves. We also have Poa'aha, which is the more common one that is generally unlobed, but sometimes has small lobes. And this one is Malolo, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So, oops. Sorry, that was my cat. Come and get the cat. So Wauke Nui is, it's a little bit of history of this because a lot of you may not be familiar with this. So this was first spotted by, from what I understand, from Pua Van Dorp in the Kona area. And she told Peter Van Dyke, who is the director of the Amy Greenwell Ethnobotanical Garden, about this plant that she thought was different. So he collected it and he put it in his collection at Amy Greenwell. And it was growing there for a few years. And then I saw, well, this is something different. And I collected it and brought it to Kula and grew it for a few years. And when I harvested it after, I thought, oh, it got big, and I was like, okay, we'll harvest this. It was really woody and it was kind of junk. And I thought, well, this is kind of junk. So I just kind of didn't really think about it. But it was the second generation that came from that original planting that it grew very vigorously. And the bast was actually whiter than the Poa'aha, which is the more common one that I was growing. So kind of interesting, because the story of my koha, who is the Aumakua of the Wauke, So he sacrifices himself to become the Wauke plant. And so what's interesting is that first generation of Wauke puts its energy into the roots of the Wauke, and then it's the next generation that really is the one that thrives. So something to keep in mind about this particular variety of Wauke. So one of the easy ways of identifying the Hawaiian varieties of Wauke is that if you see on the left here, the leaf stems and the new growth has a little bit of a reddish tinge to it. The one on the right is, we think it might be Samoan. It was an introduced variety. So you can see that you don't see that color change there. Let's see. And also all of the Wauke varieties in the Pacific are female, and the female flowers here on the left. And we do have the introduced Asian variety here, but that is a male. And so the flowers look very different. So all around the Pacific is only the female plants, which is really nice because when the males and females are together, they become very invasive. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I made a few videos for my students because, you know, we went online and we weren't able to do our Kappa labs and things like that. So I'm gonna show you these. My daughter helped me make these, and they were, they're a little amateurish, but you know, they kind of do the trick here. So here we go. And this is Wauke Nui with these really large leaves. The fiber in the Wauke Nui is very thick and strong, and it's used for making men's mallow and pa'u for women. This is po'aha. This is the most common type of Wauke that we find in Hawaii. The leaves are usually unlobed or very slightly lobed. It grows to be about 12 feet tall in a season. The fibers on this compared to the Wauke Nui are much finer. And we soak the fiber usually for several weeks, and it softens, and then we make a more paper-like kappa from this. This one is usually in the final beating, a watermark design is beaten into this one. So this is Wauke Malolo, like named after the flying fish, and you can see the leaves are very indented, almost like the wings of the flying fish. This one I only rediscovered about 5 years ago. We don't know very much about this Wauke. It only grows to be about 9 feet tall, and the fiber is very white. It's somewhere between the Wauke Nui and Po'aha in its texture. We know this was used medicinally, but we don't know too much more about this. So we're still learning about this variety. Okay. Oh. So we harvest the Wauke when we have at least 7 feet of usable unbranched stalk. And when we cultivate it, we make sure that we just nip these little side shoots off as they form. And this is something that we have to do year-round. So this one, this was a shoot that we missed, and these will grow about 1 inch a day. So if I was to break this one off now, it would leave a scar here on the bark. So here's some of the tools that we use for stripping our bark. We have a couple of shell scrapers here. Very simply, they can be used for removing the outer bark, or after it's done to clean it up a little bit. This is a meahole, and I'll demonstrate how we use that. And then we have several varieties of miho mano, they're shark's tooth knives. And so these we use to cut into the bark. I usually make a shortcut in the bark here and use my shell scraper to lift. Now at this point you can either just use your fingers and just pull the bark back like this, and you'll start, we always start at the base. And another trick to do is to use the Maʻawe, which is this little stick which has an angle on it, and we could put it in here and just push. So that's a little bit fast. So once we get to the tip, once we've stripped it, we're gonna, again, just loosen it by going along, pulling it back as we go. Okay, and then lift this off here. I usually put my hand underneath here and just kind of push as I go. So we have now the bark removed from the stick here. And then sometimes this bark can be, you know, wants to keep this round shape. So we take it from the tip and we roll it inside out like this. And then we give it a good smash just to kind of flatten it out a little bit. And now it's ready to remove this outer bark here. So we're only going to be using the inner bark to make our Kappa. So traditionally you would use a bamboo knife, which you that has a very, when you split it, has a very, very sharp edge, and you can cut along here and lift up these tabs here. But I prefer to use a modern knife, which is a little bit faster. So I use just make a shallow cut across here, and then I use the edge to lift a little tab and pull it towards me. So once I have these tabs done, I need to get a little bit longer just so I have something to hold on to. Okay. Then I'll put it on my thigh here, upside down. Now if you try to remove the bark from this way, if you pull on these, they just break off in short pieces. So the trick is to do it upside down, and then I usually use my left hand to kind of hold these down and pull. And I just do this in short tugs. And you can see it takes the bark off nice and clean. And if something like that happens, you can just recut it. Okay, now we've got the inner and the outer bark separated. So this we are going to discard the outer bark, and then we go back with either a knife or a scraper, whatever you prefer to use, and we can take off any of these little leftover bits. They can be scraped off if you prefer. But my knife's a little bit sharper. So we'll just clean this up, anything that got left behind before. And then this tab here, we just cut off. Now one of the things you might notice is it starts to brown really quickly, and this is called oxidation. So one of the things that we do usually before we beat is we put this into salt water, sometimes up to a week, and that helps to bleach out any of the brown and prepares the bark for beating. Okay, let's see. So I know that's not the method that I was taught originally. I did the scraping of the bark, and so if that might be, that particular method might be new to some of you, but I think it really makes a nice clean bark. It takes it's quite a bit quicker, and I like the finish feel of the Wauke when it's not shaggy or anything. So it's a good technique to learn, and it takes a little practice. So it might be something that you can practice on. So let's look at a few definitions. I'm going to be talking about different kinds of things that may be unfamiliar to you. So vaili'ili'i, literally a little bit of water. So this is kapa that's made from freshly harvested Wauke bast. So it's not soaked for a prolonged period. And the strips are just beaten out with the moisture that's in it when it's left with the soaking. So you're not adding extra water as you're working with it. And this is what's used to make the majority of the malo, pa'u, and kihei. Now, mo'omo'o, which is a contraction of the word malo'o, which means to dry. So these are strips of retted Wauke. Some people call it fermented. I prefer retted. But these are the ones that have been soaked for a while. These are beaten out and then dried. And then multiple mo'omo'o are put together to make larger sheets. And this kind of kapa is usually watermarked with the designs that are from the carved beaters. And then we have pa'u, which are pa'u, which is a really fine watermarked kapa that's made from the retted mo'omo'o. And I think of pa'u as pa is the, your kua, and u is putting the moisture on as you work. So this kind of kapa, you are adding water every time you're, beating each section. So constantly adding that moisture. And then popo is another way of making fine kapa. And this is when they take the retted Wauke and tear it up and kind of, beat it up into a kind of a mush ball. So it's, the fibers are really fine and spread out smooth and again, very paper-like. So those are some of our terms for today. Let's see. So this is another video. So I'm going to demonstrate in this video this vaili'ili'i beating process. And the original video is 15 minutes long, so I'm going to kind of scooch in and move it forward a little bit so we don't have to take up too much time. And here we go. Let's talk about tools today, kapa making tools. So we have here our kua, which is our anvil. We have one that's made of wood and the one that's made of stone. And this is the one we use first. And then once we soften the fiber, we move it on to the wooden kua. And here are our beaters. We have two types of beaters. We have the round one that's called a hohoa, which can be either smooth or have these kind of widely spaced grooves, which we use to start to soften up the fiber. And once that's softened, then we move on to our ie kuku, which look like this. They sometimes will have a pattern on the side. These have lines, the wide and medium, and then I switch over to one that has very fine lines. And as the Wauke separates and spreads out, it gets finer and finer, and we use the finer lines on it to move it and to make it thin. Okay, so this is the piece that we harvested a few days ago. It's been soaking, and I've just laid it out here on my kua. I have a couple of those shell tools that I showed you earlier. So I'm just gonna go back and make sure I get off anything that I might have missed a little bit earlier. And just make sure it's nice and cleaned up. there's any little dark spots on there, I can take them out. And if I can't get them with this tool, then I can get them out as I'm working. But that's just to kind of get it started. So we noticed that the Wauke strip, this is the outside where the bark is, and this is the inside, which is now getting a little bit slimy, which is just fine. So when you're making Kappa and you want to stick these together, you want to put the sticky side towards the outside so that it sticks together. Okay, so here's the piece that we harvested, and I'm going to do the first beading on here on the kua pohaku, the stone anvil, and using the round hohoa, the round beater. Now, again, we mentioned before, it has an outside and an inside. This is the inside bark. I always start at the base on the inside, and I'm just going to go back and forth. Now you'll notice already that it's already softened up. It's kind of like leather over here, but now the fibers are now starting to spread apart a little bit. So that's exactly what we want. And we're going to go through and work on okay, so I've gotten to the end, and one of the things you might have noticed is that the marks of the beater are all going in this direction. So now that I'm going to turn this over, when I beat it coming back the other way, then the marks are going to go across those that I made. So this really helps to move the fiber out as I'm working. Okay. Okay, so we've beaten this out now. We've done the first beating on this, and we've moved it over into the wooden kua. And as I mentioned before, this is the outside, which is the bark side, and then the inside was a little bit sticky. So now in this process, I want to thin this out and widen this out. This is called vaili'ili'i, this process, because we're just using the moisture that's just in here. We're not having to add moisture to this as we're working. So I have it folded back from the tip so that the two back sides are together so they don't stick together. And then I'm going to be using the widest lines on my EA because this is how we start the process. Here we go. Now you notice how this is already starting to widen a little bit, and that's what we want. We don't want to go overboard with this, but it's a process. Now you notice that first layer that we start with, which was much thinner than the base, is now actually wider than the base. And we're going to beat it going back the opposite way. So hopefully this all aligns and becomes the same thickness throughout, which is what we want. You feel me? Okay. So now we're going to open this up gently, and we're going to go back in the opposite direction. But this time I'm going to fold it in a little bit different way so that the crease lines will flatten out. So I'm making this a little bit bigger. Now it's all about the same thickness, and we are going to keep folding it, and we're going to now beat this out and it'll keep spreading out. So the general rule is about 1 inch of width is at 4 inches of finished Kappa. Okay, then we're going to roll it up. And okay. We're going to open it up. So here we are with our finished piece. We can give it a little pull, tug it out, and flatten it down and take some of these creases out. And now if you want to make a larger pieces, then you can layer these together and they'll felt together again with that sticky side, and then here's the outside. Okay, so that just showed that process of the Vaili Kappa making. Again, you saw that there was no extra water, and the real time for me to beat that piece out was about 15 minutes. So that was a bit of a condensed version. But again, so this method is one of the ways that we make mallow and pieces for pa'u for making wearable Kappa. So I'm going to show you one more short video on some of the different kinds of Kappa, some of the dyes and designs.
Mm-hmm.
So the process that I just demonstrated called Vaili is one that we use to make mallow and pa'u, which are double width for wearing. And this is all of the bark from one stalk of the Wauke nui. And you can see that it is strong, and you can tie it up in a knot, and it is actually washable. So this is what a man's mallow would have been like, and this doesn't take too long to beat out. Now to make a pa'u or a woman's skirt, I would use 4 pieces like this, and I would beat them together so that you don't see the, you layer them so you don't see the leaf scars here, and that's what this one would look like. So for a woman's pa'u, you would take 4 pieces of the Wauke nui, and they would be layered and beaten together. So this is what a woman's skirt would have been like, again, below the breast and to the knee, and would be wrapped around the body, and it also could be belted. If it wasn't tucked in, you could belt it. So another process, which was also very common, was where the Wauke stalks would be stripped and soaked for a longer period of time, and this, and they get kind of really soft, and they start to well, it's called retting, but it's kind of like rotting, where it gets really pulpy and kind of stinky. Now I take 2 of the Wauke stalks and beat those together, just like that first process that I showed you. You could see the grooving marks in there. So now this piece is all the same thickness throughout, instead of having a wide base and a thin tip. So these can be dried and stored for many years if you need to. And this is a great way of preserving your material, especially when it's in season. So we can take this material and re-wet it, and we can layer them together and beat out Kappa. And this is the one that is more paper-like, and it has the watermarks in it. And this was made to used to make Kappa moi or blankets and other things that didn't need to be as strong as the Mallow and the Pa'u were. So another thing we can do with these molds to dye them in this stage, like this one was dyed with kukui bark, and then these 2 were the same, and I put this one into the taro patch mud, and the tannins that are in the dye react with the iron in the soil and turn it black. But then we could dye our pieces and then lay them together and then beat them out so they could be pre-dyed. So some of the dyes that I use, I showed you the yellow, the Pa'u. This is from Olena. This pretty silver gray is from burnt sugarcane leaves that are ground down very fine and mixed with water. This pinkish one is an alaya, one of our red earths. This brown one has various bark dyes from sandalwood to kukui and a few other things. This is a kukui dye here. This black one is from charcoal that's ground and beaten into the fiber. This yellow here is noni, stamped with alaya. And then in the mid 1800s, laundry bluing was introduced as a trade item, and so it finds its way into some of the Kappa as well. This blue is uki uki, which is one of the plants that we're going to learn about. So after you've made your Kappa and dyed your Kappa, then you're going to decorate it with, these are called ohe kapala. So ohe is bamboo. Most of these are made out of bamboo or wood, and kapala means to stamp. So we see these many different designs. So pre-contact, all the designs were made with these lapa. These are just liners that have varying numbers of teeth in them, sometimes 2, sometimes 6 or 7, and you can wiggle these and make wiggly lines, or draw straight lines and you can do cross hatching. There's many things you can do, which we'll show you in our PowerPoint. After contact, and with the introduction of material from India, calicos and printed materials, we start to see these other designs. And again, there's just many of them. And sometimes we even see stamps from seeds like the ko seed, or from the cut banana stalk, which makes a really interesting design. So sometimes they're natural, but most often we see these carved designs. Okay, so that was a little bit about different kinds of Kappa, some of the, the stages of making them, like using the mo'o. We looked at just, the bark from one stalk of the Wauke nui, and then some of the dyes and some of the decorations and things like that. So, so now we're going to look at Mallow specifically, and it's interesting because when I first started out, I thought all Hawaiian Kappa had to be watermarked, otherwise it wasn't Hawaiian Kappa. But the more I go to different museums and look at collections, every time I go, I have to rethink everything I thought. And so one of the really, I'll share some interesting things, but I like to go back and look at some of the original etchings from the late 1700s, early 1800s. And even though we we have to kind of take these with a grain of salt because these are artists' renditions. I kind of like to see what was being captured at that time. So let's look at a couple of these images. So if you're looking, what's interesting is in the Bishop Museum collection, the average length of the mallow is about 7.5 feet, which would kind of fit with some of these images. There are a few that are 12 feet long, but there's not a whole lot, which is kind of interesting because I always thought mallow had to be 12 feet long, but 7.5 seems to be the norm. Mallows seems to be that they can be worn either like high on the hip or more down on high above the hip bones or down on the waist, depending. They range from about 10 inches in width to about 14. They could be a little bit wider as well. Let's see. And some of the traditions that I know of, a mallow wouldn't have been something that you would share with anybody. It would have to be somebody who is, you know, very intimate family member, like a father and son, or brother and brother, or maybe iconic to iconic, but it's generally not something that you would, you know, give a used mallow away or something like that. So one of the questions that we've had for a while is how long can you wear a mallow before it needs to be replaced? I came across this story from, and this was actually like the late 1700s, where this fellow had approached a ship's captain and asked if he could, when he left the island, if he could take him to another island. And the captain asked him, well, why do you want to leave? He says, well, my wife will only make me a new mallow every 2 or 3 months. So that seems to be a divorceable offense. And I guess that's like way too long to wear a mallow, but we guess maybe you could wear them for a month. And again, depending on the way that they were manufactured, they were washable, excuse me. Most of the mallow in the Bishop Museum and other museum collections are sewn together in sections about 4 feet long, which was quite interesting. And a lot of them are really, you know, again, the ones that the museums are going to collect are going to be the real fancy ones, but some of them are very intricately designed and pretty thick. So we also know that women wore mallow for swimming and surfing. And there's a term called malokea, which means literally white loincloth, but it's an epithet for a female priest enjoying masculine privileges and exemptions from female kapu. So in particular, she might enter a heiau temple where female deities were worshipped. I thought that was quite fascinating. So again, and for hula performances, you would have had, you know, much more elaborate costumes. So in 2018, I teach the Hawaiian fiber arts or Maʻawe class at the UHMC, and my students, we decided rather than doing all of the other projects, we were just going to focus on making mallow. So we did this and we gifted them out to different practitioners in the community. So this is a wonderful little video made by Chelsea Machado about that experience. We're very excited to see what the future is going to bring for this project. This hasn't been done in 100 years. Mallow wearing went out very early because of pressure from the missionaries. They didn't want to see men wearing mallow. In some of the performances, like at the Mary Monarch and the Maui Arts and Cultural Center, where we made Kappa for performances, we've had such a hard time making wearable Kappa. We've had issues with tearing and not the strength that we know was historic because people wore Kappa every day, and we're still learning this process. There are 3 known varieties of Wauke. This particular one that we're making the mallow out of is Wauke Nui, and the growing of this particular type also disappeared because it's used for making pa'u and mallow. And when those stopped being worn, the plant wasn't as cultivated. my Maʻawe Hawaiian fiber art students decided that we would cut down the whole patch that I had growing. Most of them have never made Kappa before, and they just did an awesome job. So some of the mallow we've made are very simple mallow that are made just with one piece. We have a surfing mallow, we have a gardening mallow and a number of other mallow that are made in that way. And some of these other ones where we've taken two pieces and we've beaten them out, and then we've beaten the two pieces together. This way makes it a little bit wider mallow, and it's a little bit more formal looking. When we get these mallow to the practitioners, what we hope to get is the feedback. There's a lot of practical information that we just don't know yet because we've never had this plant again in any quantity to be able to actually do this kind of research.
So I chose to use the Maʻawe as the stamping, and then these two mauna represents the peaks on Kaho'olawe, and then I sold the Bay, and that is what the
he celebrates Lono. Lono's color is white. Our Kappa came out really white.
It's very hard to get Kappa to be really white, which is why we decided to keep it white and not put any design on it.
And this is the tool that we used to groove it. We had to go down one by one, line by line.
This is a surfing mallow. We dyed this with noni. It may turn a little pink as the salt water hits it.
This is shaped as a mountain for his farm of country. So we used kalo to make these moon shapes because a lot of the planting is determined by the moon. And then we did our band, which this signifies the rain.
It has a pico line that goes from Mauna to Mauna, just linking the past to the future. There's all different kinds of theories on how humans were made in Hawaiian stories. So one of them is that we came from the stars.
And we dyed it a couple of times because first it was almost like a sage green. And then we re-dyed it and got some more blue. And the lines are a lion, and that will represent the dirt.
We have Kanaka. This is a blue dye made from the uki berry. We have the hauki design here. Sea urchin, another word for pana.
I chose these designs at the bottom because it represents his kakao. The black on the side is made out of coal ash and is coated in pilali, which is tree sap. The silver is made from coal ash as well, mixed with coconut water. And the floating designs throughout this mallow are representative of ulu.
It's symbolizing the cacao that he has, so he knows the meaning of these. So it's kind of like it's something for him to know.
So he carved this. So I tried to replicate that part of the hair that he carved out of stone on here, and the triangle because he's such a strong kane.
Ikunahoa means twin springs, and right here you see a little white popping out. This wasn't planned, but it just happened. So we decided to keep it, and we thought it replicates the springs.
So that was a really an interesting project. Again, the Haumana did an awesome job. But that was, you know, we're still trying to learn and trying to get feedback from wearers of mallow to find out what works, what doesn't work, what we can do better. So I'm going to show you just a few mallow from the museums. And again, every time I go, I you know, have to rethink everything. So some of them are just beautifully designed like these. And that was just really interesting to find out that they were actually sewn together. So you can see they were sewn and then they were stamped or decorated after they were put together. So this one you can see it's just a single piece because you can see the leaf scars here. So it's just one layer. And here is where the seam is on the back, and you can see it's a fairly thick piece. This one is two pieces that have been layered together and beaten out, so it looks a little bit thinner. So that's another method of constructing mallow. This one as well. This one, you can see the leaf scars here. So, and this one was probably 3 or 4 pieces that were sewn together. So some of the kinds of things that I think about that we don't really have answers to, and maybe some of you watching can help. Would you have worn an undergarment under, if you, let's say you had a really fancy mallow that had, was highly decorated that you probably couldn't wash just because of the design? Would you wear just a simple mallow underneath it? That would be something that you could wash later. What about menstrual mallows for women? And would those have been washable and reusable? So these are just kind of a few things I think about. This is a ka'e or ka'ai, which is the sash here. Sometimes it's referred to as the mallow of Liloa, but this is a feathered piece. But it makes me wonder, for some of those 12-foot mallow, could they have been worn more in a decorative way, or maybe even wrapped around, the waist like a cummerbund or something like that. So things that we just don't know right now. So pa'u, again, let's talk about pa'u. Most of them were 12 feet by 24 inches. They were wrapped around the body and tucked in at the waist. Simple pa'u for a commoner might it be like the one that I showed you, which was only like 7 feet long, and some of them may have been even shorter than that, maybe just half that width. Kind of probably depended on the resources that people had. The really fancy ornate pa'u that would have been worn by ali'i or women, or for hula performances, they could be 12, they average 12 feet, they could be longer. And they had 5 or 10 sheets in them. And the sheets would have been laid one on top of another. And then the top edge would have been folded over and they would be sewn together. And they would actually have a cord sewn in at their ends so that they would be wrapped around the body 3 or 4 times. And then, then they would be tied with the cords. And they could be made either from the Waili'ili'i Kappa or pa'u type, because if it was the pa'u type, and if they were sewn together and tied with the cord, you didn't have any stress on that particular kind of kappa, so that could have been worn that way. And sometimes they actually did both of those in the same piece, so which is really interesting. This is an interesting etching here. And you can see people are wearing, the women are wearing pa'u, but it looks like some of the men might have pa'u on, or maybe they're wearing their kihei wrapped around them. We're just not really sure. And so again, you go to the museums and you see some of these pieces and you're just like, whoa, okay, I had no idea. So this is actually just a half of one. I think it was more than 12 feet long. But you can see it's actually panels that are sewn together. And again, I was surprised at how thick some of these pa'u were. And I was also surprised at how there was these giant patches in some of them that were quite large. So these must have been leaf branches or scars or something like that that were patched and sewn. And sometimes you can see many patches in them. So it's quite interesting when you look at the backs of things in the museums. This is a beautiful one. This was a 12-foot long pa'u, and it had 10 layers. And you can see, 5 layers here and 5 layers here that were folded together and sewn along the seam. It's missing its tie cord, but then it would have been tied at those edges. And this one actually was made out of, some sheets were waili'ili'i and some were pa'u. And unfortunately, most of the pieces that are in the museums have been cut up into smaller pieces and scattered around the world. But I just love to look at the designs of some of these pieces and imagine what the whole one looked like. So this is another one. This was only 5 sheets. Again, it was 12 feet long. And what was interesting that each sheet was different. Some had different watermarks or were made different. This is 3 different sheets here, and there was 5. So one of the things that we see sometimes in Kappa Moai and in Pa'u, where we see different watermarks and different patterns on each sheet, it's possible that a different woman made that one layer and then they put them all together, because this would have been a lot of work. A 10 sheet, 12 foot long Pa'u would have taken 80 stalks of Wauke, which is just really amazing. And so this is interesting because this is where that was a 12-foot long one. So it wasn't sewn, but it was overlapped and beaten together from end to end. And you can actually see where that join was. And here's another wonderful design. So this is a contemporary Pa'u that my daughter made for an exhibit, and this was also done with this was done with for 8 sheets, 8 pieces of the Wauke nui that were beaten together into 4 panels, which were then sewn together. I just want to point out that the lei here that the mannequin is wearing is actually made of Kappa. The maili and kaunaoa is dyed and with native dyes. And so this was a 12-foot long sheet. It's sewn down the middle. You can see a little bit of a seam here. This was a piece that was just completed this last year. And so kihei. Now, I don't know a whole lot about kihei. There's very few samples in the museums to look at that are, perhaps correctly labeled. And I haven't done a deep dive into this, but here's some of historic pictures. This is Nahi'ena and Kamehameha III. Again, high-ranking ali'i. You can see kind of a lot of volume of their kihei. And these fellows, each one is kind of wearing their kihei in a different way, tied at the shoulder, tied in the front. Or this fellow here looks like kind of like a toga. If it was big enough, it didn't have to be tied. It could have been thrown over the shoulder and wrapped and things. So, and this one is really interesting because it looks like it was folded over and layered. And then this one is just tied in the front. But he's sitting down, and if he was standing up, that piece looks to me that it was, maybe 5 by 6 feet or somewhere around there. So I think the kihei were kind of a lot larger than we imagined that they would be. So this is a technique that I'm just working out for myself, that I started with a piece, actually 2 pieces of Wauke nui that were 3 inches wide, and beat those out, and they were layered. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a yardstick. So this one beat out to 36 inches from 3 inches, which I thought was really awesome. So this is a method that I'm just trying to kind of perfect for myself. And this was a kihei that was made for my friend Ikaika Nakahashi. And there's some pictures of kind of how we were trying to figure out how to drape it and things like that. And because of the nature of the kappa being somewhat delicate, we decided not to actually tie it in a knot. We made a little tie cord here out of Wauke. We made a piece of cord out of that and used that as the tie cord. So that makes me a little more comfortable to tie it to tie it with a string rather than tie it in a knot at this time, until we can kind of figure out a little bit more about how to do that. So, so my question is, how many of you are growing your own Wauke so that you can make Kappa? And I would like to hear more from you folks about that. I do have, I know the Wauke nui is very scarce, and I am trying to get it distributed out to different growers. So, and some of you have gotten some from me already, but you can contact me if you're interested in getting a patch started. So I think that's all I have for today. And let's talk story.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm sorry we didn't get to see you in person with your exhibit. It's definitely a kind of presentation that could use that.
Yeah.
So we just had a couple of questions so far, and please, people, put your questions in the chat. And the first one, how did you come to your academic interest in wearable Kappa?
Oh, great question. Because actually I started, my first interest was in dyes, and my mother got her degree in ethnobotany. She did a lot of work with dyes, and so I kind of grew up with that. And working at the garden, I had a lot of materials that I could work with, and I eventually thought, oh, I'll just, I'll take a Kappa class. That was the one that Moana and I think Delani and Eric Enos, and there was a bunch of people that did that through Tamari. But it was really, I wasn't planning to do anything until Kupuna Marie McDonald said, I want you to be in an exhibit. And I was like, nah, and she says, well, you're going to do it, and you have a year to do something. So I was like, oh my God. So that's really when I got started really being serious about it.
This question is from Sina Keala. To beat together layers of Wa'ili I Kappa, what side of the Ie Kuku Hohoa do you prefer? And when Kappa is sewn together, what material is used?
So it's just a strip of Wauke or of Kappa. You can pull it off and make a cord out of that, and it's usually not twisted cord. It's usually just a flat strip. I'm sorry, what was the first part of that question?
To beat together layers of Wa'ili I Kappa, what side of the Ie Kuku Hohoa do you prefer? And I'll put that into the chat if that's.
So always when I'm beating anything, I always start with the pepehi, which are the widest lines. And I usually beat front and back with the pepehi. Then I go the ho'opa'i, which is the medium lines, go front and back, and then ho'oki, which is the fine line. So I go through that process, to make it thinner.
So this is from Mariella and Sarah. I would love to start a Wauke Nui patch. How do I get in touch with you? I'm on Oahu.
Okay, I am putting in the chat my let's see, my email and a couple of resources, a couple of articles that I wrote that you can find on material approaches to Polynesian bark cloth. And so I have the link in there, which is actually, it's online, so you can just look at it. You don't have to buy the book. And then if you're interested in more on design, Hina Nubel has a wonderful website at Kalopico that talks a lot more about design and to see some of these beautiful pieces of Kappa, historic pieces.
Great, and I put that into the Facebook, so people can check that out in the comments. What are your thoughts on the commercialization of producing wearable Kappa, and is it even possible?
Well, we need to grow a lot more Wauke. That's, I mean, we're making, those of us who teach Kappa making, there's a lot of us that do that, but there's not a lot of people actually growing the Wauke. So I think there is room for commercial growers of Wauke, because I think people who maybe don't have the aina or the time to invest in it, and it is an everyday kind of thing, maintaining your patch, would be interested in actually buying just the raw material so they can make things.
Thanks. I think there's another question from Keanu Inouye Roldan. Aloha, I'd love to know the preferred woods for kua.
So you want kind of a medium wood. The one that we use, we prefer is mango. It's not too hard and it's not too soft. And that's the one, trying to think of what other things that we use. you don't want anything that's too hard. Milo is really loud for a kua. I have one that is really loud. But mango is the preferred wood for kua.
Okay, one more question. What are the top 3 mistakes people make when they're processing Wauke to make Kappa?
Oh, well, I think the most important thing is actually to grow it well. And if you grow it and begin to understand that, I always harvest at the same time every year, and I'm now harvesting my entire patch and processing it. So because my big mistake was leaving things in the field for too long, and then they get old, and they're harder to strip, and the fibers get woodier and things like that. So it's kind of disciplining myself to grow and harvest regularly, and the processing, I have other ways of doing that, which you don't have time to really cover today. But
so Namaka Kahiko, are you going to start a new class?
I still haven't quite finished my 3-year group with Keli'i Raichel's halau. Our hamana, COVID happened and we weren't able to get done, but I do a lei ishikawa, and I do an introduction to Kappa. I think we just put the dates out. I'm sorry, I don't have them off the top of my head. It'll be this summer, like late May, and then it's a Kappa making class, and we go through a lot of the basics. And then I think a month later we do a dye class. So those are 2 classes that I have that are coming up this year.
So Tori Laitila, how soon after cutting does the bark need to be removed?
I like to do it about within 24 hours, because it can if it dries out too much, it can stick. So I usually do it right away. I try and do it the same day if possible. I mean, sometimes you can wait a few days. You put it in a trash can with a lot of water and keep it moist. It'll last a few days, but I do like to get to it right away.
From Ali Atkins, how long does it take to grow a 10-foot stem?
So Wauke grows like a foot a month. And so and we usually harvest it about 18 months, and it's usually 12 to 15 feet at that time. So it's really incredible to see how fast it grows, but about a foot a month is average. Allie's my classmate.
Great. So I think that's all of the questions. To one person's question, yeah, the video is going to stay on the HK West Maui Community Fund Facebook page. So if you want to, maybe you could look at it later. There's a bunch of comments that weren't really questions that you might want to take a look at later. And thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sorry we couldn't do it in person.
Well, maybe next time, but yeah, so keep in touch. I love to talk about Kappa. If you know me, you know that. So, but thanks for this opportunity, and it was wonderful to spend time with everybody.
Okay, have a good night.
Okay, aloha.